Welcome to this brief history of our observance of Good Friday. This is Father Gary Brower at Good Shepherd Episcopal Church. I am happy to share this with you. We return to the accounts of the 4th century pilgrim Egeria for our earliest reports of events surrounding Good Friday in Jerusalem. You'll recall, if you looked at the history of Palm Sunday, Egeria was a woman from Spain who traveled to the Holy Land on pilgrimage and spent a number of years in Jerusalem. Her reports of what went on there during Holy Week have been critical for our understanding of how Holy Week observances were developed. So what we learn from Egeria is that the observance was pretty complex, much more so than what we are accustomed to here. And I want to read a brief summation of what she wrote about this day. At Jerusalem, late in the 4th century, it was beginning to be light on Good Friday, when, following services throughout Thursday night, the procession from Gethsemane reached the city. At the sanctuary of the cross, the entire narrative of the trial before Pilate was read, and soon after, still before sunrise, all went to pray at the column where Jesus was scourged. After the people had rested in their homes, they returned to the sanctuary of the cross. A casket containing a relic which was believed to be wood from the cross was placed on a linen-covered table in front of the bishop. The people filed past, bowing, touching the cross and the title with their foreheads and their eyes, and kissing the wood. At noon they assembled in the open courtyard of the sanctuary, and from that hour until 3 o'clock the time was entirely occupied with lessons about the Passion, from the Psalms and the Prophets, the epistles or Acts and the Gospels, prayers suitable to the day having been said between the lessons. At 3 o'clock, the passage from St. John's Gospel about the death of the Lord on Calvary was read, and soon after the service ended. In the evening, the story of the burial was read in the Anastasis, the sanctuary of the resurrection, and a vigil was maintained there throughout the night by all who were able to sustain it. A great crowd took part, although some did not begin their watch until midnight. And so it was with this 4th century pilgrimage within the city of Jerusalem that much of what we now do on Good Friday has its origins. What we now know in our celebration or our observance is distilled from that with some additions. And so we have a three-part observance in Western Christianity. Some of us don't really go all the way through all three parts. We focus on the two. The first one being, of course, the liturgy of the Word, the reading of Scripture. There's an introduction to what we'll read, the reading of the John's Passion, the long version that we have in John, often with sections from Isaiah, one of the servant songs, and a passage from the letter to the Hebrews. And then there will be prayers following that, solemn prayers. We often refer to them as the solemn collects. And there are a set of biddings and silent prayer, followed by a collect, something that brings all of that together. And this was a very ancient form of prayer, probably throughout the church, but it really only retained this form in our Good Friday liturgy. Then there would be the opportunity to venerate the cross, to live out or to act out what we heard in those readings. And in many churches, a cross will be placed in front. People will come up and touch the cross, kiss the cross, kneel or prostrate themselves before the cross. And and then sort of return to their seats. And this is a practice that at Good Shepherd we have done in years past. And then, as I mentioned in the section on Maundy Thursday, the practice arose early on, 6th or 7th century, of a desire to have communion on Good Friday. Days, Good Friday and Holy Saturday being days when communion, the Eucharist, was not settled or celebrated. But there was a desire to receive communion on this day, and so bringing the bread and the wine out from the reserved sacrament to serve to folks on Good Friday became part of that tradition. One can argue whether that practice is really in keeping with the solemnity and the desolation of Good Friday. Again, some churches do this and some churches don't. It's really sort of a local tradition. One of the other practices that some churches do on Good Friday is a long service, a 3-hour service, hearkening back to some of the stuff that Egeria reported. And a 3-hour service often called the 7 last words, where the 3 hours would be broken into portions, and the 7 last words with meditations would be done. I've certainly done this in Episcopal churches as well. What's interesting is that this was not part of any ancient practice, but was developed in the 17th century in Peru by Jesuits. But as traditions go, it has moved out of that and into sort of wider, even Protestant practice for Good Friday. And of course, to end, the question that often gets asked, and I've had it asked this week indeed, is why is it called Good Friday? And there are many, many answers to that question. One is sort of a theological answer, that it's good because on that day Jesus died on our behalf, and that being an ultimate good for us. Other answers are less theological, more historical and more cultural, and it's, like I say, it's hard to know which is the right answer. According to one linguist, the adjective good traditionally designates a day on which a religious observance is held. So it's a holy day, and so therefore it is a good day. Others talk about good as being an Old English word that just became more associated with this particular day. It could come from the German Gottes Freitag, God's Friday, and then being morphed into Gute Friday, into Good Friday, and then translated into English. In other parts of the world, it's not necessarily known as Good Friday, and certainly the Friday before Easter in the Orthodox churches is known as Holy Friday, or Great Friday. So we don't know. We don't know. It would be nice if there was a simple answer, but like most things in the 2,000 years of Christian history, the reason behind the title of Good Friday being applied to this day is lost in historical obscurity.